Bible reading this morning will come from Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. Chapter 1, verse 6 of Philippians. Being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ.
I'd like to thank Kenny for leading that song that he did before. I don't know if he knew exactly what the topic this morning was going to be because he asked me about it before. He said, I'm leading singing tomorrow. What's the general topic of the lesson? And I told him, but it was so vague, and I didn't give him really any song suggestions. And he turned out, just led the perfect song. Tell me the story of Jesus. For the next couple of Sundays, we're going to be talking about the church, specifically the aspect of the church of family. You know, the church is supposed to be a family. It's described as a family. And when it's not acting like a family, there can be problems. But when it is acting like a family, it can be a beautiful and wonderful thing to be a part of. We're going to talk about so many different aspects of this family. That is, when we're looking to the future as a church, and also those individual families that make up the church, how we can improve our lives, become closer together, and become closer to God. If you'd like to open up your Bible to a specific location, I guess you can just go ahead and start with Philippians. We're going to start in chapter 1, and then we're going to pull some things out of this to help us launch into this series. I began writing a book about I guess the first part of quarantine. I went to go up to see my parents, and my dad said, I'm writing a book. And so I said, me too. And so I just sat down, and I thought, what can I write a book about? And I had gone to this seminar that was about writing, and I remember the guy got up there and said, don't write a book unless you have something to say. And here I was sitting down trying to think up something to say so that I could write a book. But I began to think about what would be beneficial for the church. And I finally settled on a topic, and that is people. Again, very broad, very vague, but I called it the People Project, and that's because that's what the church is. The church is not an institute, it's not a club, it's not a hangout, it's not just another business. The church is people, a very special kind of people. If you grew up in the church, or if you've been in the church very long, you know that you can develop some great friendships within the church. You can create some very good memories with people in the church, doing different activities, going to camps and doing all of these seminars and things together, and you can have all of these great memories made up with the church. But if you don't know too much about the church, or maybe if you've gone to a church before that maybe doesn't act too much like a family, or there's not a whole lot of cohesion and chemistry going on there, I want to try and paint a picture in the next couple lessons of what the church was intended to be, who we're supposed to be, and how we can become better as people. You know, I don't think I'm the only one that has began a project, and I started this project with a vision in my mind on how this thing was going to turn out. And so I began to plan, and I began to scheme, and I dreamed up this great vision of what this final outcome was going to be. And then somewhere along the line, either I just kind of let the project go, or the final outcome was nothing at all like it was supposed to be. A while back, I started this project on building a cabin. I decided to build a cabin out of pallets. Yes, in the backyard. And everyone that asked me about it, I kind of said it was a shed because I didn't want them to think he's building a clubhouse in the backyard. They don't have kids. It's not for his dog, it's for him. So I was like, and it's a cabin or it's a shed. But I watched YouTube videos on it. I saw pictures on Pinterest. Yeah, I got one. And I started looking at all of these different pictures of these cabins that people built out of pallet wood. And I thought, wow, what an incredible project. I'm going to do this. And so I gathered up all of these pallets, and I started putting them together, and I drew a picture of what this final outcome, this cabin was going to look like. Right now, in the backyard, I do have some kind of cabin in the making. It is nothing at all like I had envisioned in my head. I thought this is going to take me a couple weeks. I'm going to start stacking them up on top of each other, and it's going to be perfect. And it has taken way longer than I thought it was going to take, and it looks completely different. But it's still a project. How many times do we do that in our lives? I've been to Kenny's house. I've walked into his garage. I walk into his garage, and there's always, 12 hoods up. And there's all of these different cars and things that he's working on, and thankfully he's taking on one of my projects as well. But he's got all of these projects, but when you talk to him about it, he begins to tell you about his vision and his goal for each car. When this thing is finally done, it's going to look so good. When this thing is finally able to ride around the block, it is going to be so amazing. And he has all of these projects and things that he's working on all at one time. But beyond just projects, we do this with our lives as well. I don't know how many of you planned when you were younger to be or do something different than you're doing right now. I wanted to be a police officer at one point in my life. I am not a police officer today. But when I was younger, I remember thinking about my future. And I thought, at this point, this is who I'm going to be. At this stage in life, this is the kind of girl I'm going to marry. And I got way better than I had envisioned. But I remember thinking, this is the age I'm going to have kids. This is how many kids I'm going to have. How many boys I'm going to have, how many girls I'm going to have. These are the names for my children that I'm going to have. And I thought, this is the state I'm going to live in. And I had all of these plans. This is the age that I'm going to retire. And I'm not the only one that does that. And we look at our own futures with so much optimism. And there's so much joy. And life throws some curves. And we start to take that trail and that journey, and things end up differently. And there's still joy, and it's still wonderful. And as I look into my own future right now and we try and plan, there's still a lot of optimism and hope, even though where I'm at right now is nothing like where I thought I would be when I was younger. When it comes to the church, and we think about the visions and the plans that we make, there is something that we all share in common. There are plans that we have. There is a retirement plan that we have that does not change no matter what life throws at you, and that, of course, is heaven. There are things within the church that tie us all together, even though we are surrounded by a group of people with a bunch of different kinds of personalities, different age groups, different backgrounds, and it's such a beautiful and wonderful thing. I don't think I would have just walked up to any of you on the street, maybe some of you on the street, and thought, this would be someone that me and him would just become like best friends. But then when you get in the church and you have that bond made with Jesus' blood, and you begin to work side by side with these people, and you have that common goal, it brings you closer together. And some of those memories come from that. God is not a dreamer, he's a creator. When God decided to create the world, here it is. When God decided to save the world, here we are. All of us as Christians gathered together. And if that wasn't enough, God came to earth to show us how it's done. And when you look at the ministry of Jesus, and he starts with these 12 followers, and you look at the individual lives of those followers, they had different backgrounds from fishermen to tax collectors. They had different personalities from timid to very assertive. They had different sin struggles from excessive doubt to greed. And yet Jesus is able to work with these 12 followers. They weren't perfect. They had different backgrounds, but they were all united. They rallied under his leadership, and they were united under the hope that they shared. There's something better, and that's why we're here today. In the book of Philippians, I want us to notice this morning some of the language that Paul will use in talking about the church, his church family. And I want you to notice, this is a very different kind of book than the Corinthian letters, where it's mainly these two letters of Paul's disciplinary acts. But here he talks to the church, and he says in verse 3, I thank my God in all remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, for you, all making my prayer with joy, because of your partnership in the gospel, from the first day until now. And notice verse 6, I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ. How can he be so sure? You know, maybe there comes a point in our life when we've made a bunch of plans before. Maybe just to use the illustration of a diet. We have started so many before, especially around the Christmas and the holidays, and we start feeling guilty about all the things that we're eating, and we have this amazing plan. And maybe we write it down, and we are just so committed to doing it, and we buy all the groceries, which if you're trying to do some of these diets, it's very expensive. You spend all this money, and you have this new workout routine, and you go to the store and you buy new shoes or boots, and you buy new clothing for your new workout program, and then maybe a couple weeks later you just kind of drop off on it. But notice the language that Paul has. It's so confident. Because of the partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, I'm sure of this, that he who began this good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ. Jesus is the only one that can promise something like that. But notice also how Paul describes the church, this good work. It's a good work that we're involved in. I think sometimes in the church we can become a little bit pessimistic, and we start talking about the work of the church, and maybe we overcomplicate it, and we make it just a little bit confusing to the point that not every congregation, not every member is totally sure what the church is all about. And it's a good work. Paul talks about that, but maybe we lose sight, and so there are some elderships, or maybe they don't have an eldership, all the men get together, and they start thinking about the future of that family and that church, and so they think, what is our goal? Sometimes it's called a vision. What's the vision for our church? And instead of looking to Scripture, they just try and throw out, maybe this is what it should be. Maybe this is who we are. And there's all of these different answers to that question, and maybe each person in that room has a different answer to it. But when we turn to God, we realize that it simplifies everything. We are a part of a good work. And there's a couple different ways in how churches can go about this. Perhaps it'd be easier to think about it in terms of buckets. I love doing this. I think about my to-do list for the week. I have buckets. This is my work bucket. This is the things everything that has to do with Farley, with sermons, with lessons, with blogs, all that goes into the work bucket. That's that category. That way I can just kind of get it out of my mind, put it there, not think about it anymore. But this bucket over here, this is my life outside. This is the house projects that we're working on, the cabin. This is marriage. This is friendships. All of those things that need work go in this bucket. And then maybe you have a financial one. You break it down any way you want to, but it's easier for me if I can just put it on paper that way. But if we visualize that in the way that some congregations and some families look at their life, their goals and their vision, sometimes they just have one giant bucket. And they try and think about their future and they say, we are going to be evangelistic. We're going to be friendly. We're going to be loving. And it sounds good. And we think, that's great. That's who we want to be. We want to be loving and friendly and evangelistic, and that's who we want to be as a church, but the bucket is way too big. And there's no really way to get to that point. And it sounds good. And so what you end up with is a congregation or a group of people very excited to start a trail that doesn't even exist. There are some congregations maybe that have way too many. I was cleaning out the garage, and I decided to try and organize it some way, and I had a few containers, and so I found this old butter container, and I thought that this is going to be perfect for screws. And so I put screws in the butter container, and I stuck it on the shelf. Simple. And I thought, okay, this is off to a good start, so I picked up this little blue camping cup that I had, and I thought, this is a good cup for nails. So I just stuck nails in there, put it on the shelf. Well, my wife is way better at organizing than I am, and so she reached into her vast collection of containers, and she brought to me a bag filled with all of these tiny little containers. And she put them on the floor, and so I looked at them and I thought, there is so much potential here. I could fill all of these containers with who knows what. And so I sat down and I thought, okay, I can put fish hooks in this one. And I started to put them in there, and I looked at the overwhelming amount of small containers, and I'm like, I don't know if I can think of enough categories to put inside here. The saw blades are too big to put in these things. I don't have enough tacks to fill up this one. And so it became really confusing. So here's what I ended up doing. I took all of those small containers, and I placed them in one giant container, and I put that on the shelf. Containers to hold my containers. That doesn't do me any good. Too many. But if I just had one giant box and I thought, here's organization, and I dumped everything in that one, that's chaos. There's got to be some balance. And when you look in Scripture, that's exactly what you find. But when it's up to us and we're left to figure out how to organize our lives, how to plan our futures, we can either overcomplicate it to the point that we have no idea where to begin, or we just have this vague idea of who we want to be and no idea how to get there. But God makes it very simple. And he focuses on, and Jesus focuses on through his ministry, and Paul shows this through his writings, that there are basically just 3 buckets that we got to worry about. And you can think of them in terms of where we're reaching. There's outreach in the community. There's in-reach within the church. And there's upreach, that's worship. It's God. 3 buckets. If we want to be the best congregation that we can be, if we want to be a close family, a close-knit family, a successful church, if you want to call it that, one that is growing, one that is loving, one that is encouraging, then let's focus on those 3 areas. How can we reach out to the community? How can we make this congregation inside, the families here, how can we strengthen each other? And how can we improve our relationships with God through our worship? 3 areas, 3 buckets, and develop them all around that. We make things more complicated maybe than they need to be. And God has a way of just simplifying it. If you just think in your mind of God's vision for the church, of who we're supposed to be, a bunch of people all in one room, how are we supposed to get along? God's plan is, well, you just bind everyone together underneath the same goal, underneath the same leadership. Where things start to become more complicated is when we have our own ideas. Instead of having God as the leader, we decide, well, we should go this direction, and someone else disagrees and says, no, we should go this direction. And you have people pulling away from each other instead of together. But when we look at the New Testament church and we see how they functioned even under distress and persecution, they were close. They were a family. It doesn't matter what's going on in the outside world. I love that because I don't like to be involved in politics. I don't like to be involved in that kind of stuff. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer, so I'll just leave that to them, and I'll focus on what I can do here. But if we just leave that stuff alone, leave that out of it, not talk about any of that stuff because it doesn't matter. Let's talk about what ties us together and the areas in which we can improve in those 3 areas that we mentioned. But if you look at what Paul, as he begins to talk with these people, he says, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Paul was a minister, a fantastic minister, a missionary. He wrote so much of the New Testament, and yet how he talks about his relationship with the church, it's a partnership in the gospel. Basically what he's saying is, this is our ministry. This is our ministry. Yeah, okay, so I have the title of pulpit ministry. Steve has the title of youth minister. But this ministry is a partnership together in the gospel. When you look in the New Testament and you look at the examples of ministers that we have, they're not really that special. I'd like to think of myself as a special person. But when you look at ministers within the Bible, they are people that basically decided, I am going to proclaim the gospel and study the Bible and study the law of God and then give it to the people. And that was their focus. But today you have congregations around America and even in other forms of denominations who say the preacher is more than that. He is a singular leader within the church. He's the one that calls all the shots, leads the direction of the church. Ministry is a position of leadership, but that's never what a minister was supposed to be. Paul says this is a partnership in the gospel, together. We're working together. He says, and I'm sure of this, that he who began, Paul continually points back to God. And he focuses on who the leader of the church is supposed to be. He that began a good work is going to bring it to completion. Why? Because God is a creator and not a dreamer. God said he's coming back. God said he's making a home for us. And we can look in the past and we can see the things that God has said and that God has done. We don't really have to go down that trip down memory lane and look at all of those Old Testament examples that we have where God says, if you do this, I'll be with you and I'll be here for you. And then you have his followers going, that sounds really good. And then somewhere along the lines they go, yeah, but we'd rather do this. And then God either ends up destroying some of them or having to do some other disciplinary measure. God's not a dreamer. He's a creator. What he says, we can take to the bank. We don't have to question and talk about it and say, okay, God said this, let's have a men's meeting, let's get some biscuits and gravy, let's sit around the table, and let's discuss what God has said to us and see if we all agree on this. That was never how it was supposed to go. We were supposed to be a partnership in the gospel with God as the leader. He's given us the direction. He's told us where we need to go, the areas that we need to focus on. Let's keep it simple. Let's be the church. Let's be the family that we were supposed to be. When you look at how God designed the church, it also helps us in those individual families. When you look at the qualities that need to make up those families in order to have a healthy church. And for the next couple of weeks, those are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about. But I'd like to just give you a picture, a vision maybe of the next couple of weeks and where we're going to try and go with these lessons. And I hope you get excited about it, because even though there is a virus going on right now, and maybe it complicates things a little bit, we're still the church. Just because there's a virus and it complicates things a little bit, we're still told to go into the world and to reach out to people and to evangelize. We can figure out a way to do that from 6 feet away. We can figure out a way to do that with a mask on. We can figure out a way to do it and be the church, because this is God's plan, not our own. God didn't say, be the church. This is my plan, but if a major virus like the coronavirus happens, then the whole thing's going to fall apart. And if that's the case, just take a break from being the church for a while, we'll understand. That's not it. We have to be the church even though there's all of this stuff going on outside. And sometimes it gets a little bit harder when we think we have to be the church even if we're tired, if we don't feel good, if there's something going on in our lives. Sometimes we let feelings and events like that get in the way, and being the church takes a back burner. I'm preaching to myself here too. You become afraid, become tired, irritated, work's draining you, and we think, I can't today. But we're the church. There's a whole lot to be joyful about. There's so much that gives us confidence and peace. And when you look around at the world today, there's not a whole lot of that going on. We have a message of hope. If we can unite under Christ, if we can share that common hope and work towards those goals, we will be a light in this community. We don't have to overcomplicate things. God gives the increase. Let's just follow his plan. If you look at your life this morning and maybe you see that you've taken a detour yourself, we all have at some point. But if there is something that you're struggling with this morning and you would like our help in praying for you and helping you get back on track, we're a family. That's what we're here for. We're here to help us all stay focused and to follow that trail that God has set for us. But if there's something you're struggling with, then why not let us take care of that for you this morning by praying for you? But maybe this is just something between you and God. You know, you can respond right now. Pretty much everybody responds to a lesson. Not responding at all is still a response. You know, it's frustrating, but everyone is going to respond somehow. But if there's something that you need to take care of between you and God, why not do that today as well? That may not involve a public response, but maybe it starts with you rededicating your life to him. Because as we talk about the church as a family and where we want to go as a future, it begins with each individual in the pew, each family, working within their own spiritual lives to grow closer to God. We are a spiritual institution. Many churches need to focus on the spiritual and not the physical so much. There are so many bulletins that are filled with sick lists that are all about sicknesses and physical ailments that people have. But sometimes there's just very few spiritual things on those lists. Everyone has spiritual struggles. But the closer we become as a family, the easier it is to open up and confide in others. We're trying to do that. We're trying to do that even better. And if there's something that we can help you with, then why not make that known this morning as we stand and as we sing?